Let's bring in Omar Alghabra, the Minister of Transport. Minister, thank you, by the way, for rushing out of that press conference and joining us here on CTV's Power Play. Let's just start. There are multiple countries that have Omicron: the Netherlands, Japan, the UK. They're not on the list. Why add Egypt, Nigeria, and these three countries as opposed to more countries?
Hi, Evan, and it's good to be back on your show. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. This is a good question that actually was brought up at the press conference. Dr. Theresa Tam and Minister Duclos answered it. The answer to this question is that we're going by the information that we have, and we look at data. And Dr. Tam talked about how we look at the epidemiology situation on the ground from source countries. So it's not just the fact that there are cases. It's the fact of reported of significant community transmission. It's the fact that there's facts on the ground there of the system on the ground, reporting, knowing more information. So it is the concern of significant community transmission. It's the issue of the epidemiology and the number of passengers coming. So it's all these things come together, and those countries were selected. But those countries will adjust as we learn more about the transmission of this variant in other countries.
Okay. One of the reasons we want to know what the threshold is, vaccine rates, epidemiology, and all those issues that you've talked about. We don't know what the criteria, because we're wondering, will there be a travel ban on Europe, on the UK, on the Netherlands, on Japan, on the myriad countries? Is Canada open to putting up more travel bans on those countries?
Look, Evan, over the last year and a half, the federal government and our experts have learned a lot throughout the pandemic. And now we are able to act decisively, quickly, based on information, smart policies that target specifically what needs to happen. And yes, to answer your question, those countries or those measures will adjust. What we're saying today, that the measures that we announced today are temporary until we learn more. In a couple of weeks, we may add more or adjust some of those policies that we announced today. So yes, those policies are open for adjustment as we learn more and more about this variant.
Okay, so there's a lot of confusion, so let's just go through this slowly so people appreciate it. Of the 10 countries so far on the travel ban, a foreign national from any of those countries, as I understand, cannot come here. But let's say there's a Canadian in South Africa. Let's say there's a Canadian in Egypt.
Evan, let me just correct you there.
Okay, go. Okay,
if I may. We are not banning foreign nationals from those countries. We are banning or barring foreign nationals who have been to any of those 10 countries over the last 14 days. So a person could be a French citizen who had been to any of these 10 countries over the last 14 days. That individual will be barred from entry.
And plus, so alongside the foreign nationals, okay, that's interesting. Let's say there's a Canadian stuck in South Africa.
A foreign national, a Nigerian who is now residing in the United States, who hasn't been to Nigeria over the last 14 days, will not be barred if they're eligible to enter Canada.
I appreciate that. Okay. Let's talk about a Canadian who's stuck in one of these 10 countries. Walk us through. They can no longer come to Canada direct. They have to go to a third. So they get on a plane in Johannesburg. Now they go to Frankfurt, Germany. What happens at that point? Who pays for it? Can you just walk us through the details? Where do they get the test? How long do they get the results? Who monitors them? And then what happens when they go to Canada?
Sure. So a Canadian or a permanent resident who are eligible to enter Canada and is coming from any of these 10 countries that cannot come directly, they need to stop at a third country, get a PCR test themselves. It's a pre-departure test that they would normally get anyway, pay for it, and only be able to come to Canada if that test result is negative. And then upon arrival, they will be tested when they arrive, and then they will be required to stay at a designated facility until that test result is out. And then they'll be able to get, they are required a day 8 test And once day 8 test is negative, they will be, they no longer need to quarantine.
Okay, are these designated facilities, are these the same quarantine hotels as before? You can answer that. And also, who pays for the test on arrival? Who pays for the stay at the quarantine hotel or the designated area? And who pays for the 8-day test, the second test 8 days later?
The government will incur the cost of those PCR tests upon arrival and day 8 test. And for the facility, I will need to clarify for you because it depends on the facility they're staying. Keep in mind that we have also government facility, but I think the traveler, and I need to clarify this for you because as you can imagine, we made these decisions just an hour ago. I think the passenger will pay for that facility's accommodation a day or two, but I will need to clarify that for you.
Okay, so this is important. You don't know that the passenger who comes will have to stay in quarantine. Now, what about anybody who travels? Let's forget the 10 countries. So now if you're from one of those 10 countries, you go to a third country, the federal government will incur the cost of the test. The passenger, as we think, will incur the cost of the hotel. Could be a day or two, depending on how fast they can process those. What about if you're coming from a non-banned country? Do you now need a test to come? Do you need a test when you re-arrive in Canada?
Yes, so what we are doing, we're adding another layer of protection. Just let me remind your viewers, Evan, is that we currently have measures of protection. So all arrivals to Canada, there are requirements of vaccination, there are requirement of pre-departure test, and then we currently have a random mandatory test. What we're saying now, all travelers, other than the US, travelers who are coming from the US, will be required a mandatory arrival testing, PCR test. And then they are required to go quarantine at a safe place, like their residence, until their test result is out. Once their negative test result is out, then they are released from their quarantine if they are fully vaccinated.
Sorry, so you're saying they can quarantine, someone who comes from France could fly here, take the test, wait the results, but they can wait it at their own residence among the rest of their family? Is that right? Or do they quarantine in their own residence? And will there be people knocking on their door, like in the height of the pandemic, to check up to see if they're actually quarantined?
Evan, they'll need to prove that they have a safe place where they're isolating, even from their family, for a day or two until their test results are out. That is correct.
Okay, this sounds like a lot more testing. Does the government and do the border services or the airlines have the capacity yet for these tests? How many more tests will require? And it sounds to me like the border, right at the holiday season, is going to be crushingly slowed down by all this. What's your view?
So, first of all, you're right, Evan. We typically, as of today, do about 20,000 tests a day at our borders through either the random mandatory test or through the mandatory test for unvaccinated Canadians who are coming in. What this will do, it will increase the number. We expect that it will increase the number based on the data that we have, up to 32,000 tests a day. So that's an additional, that will stretch our capacity, that is for sure. That's why we're confident that we will work with our partners to ensure that we're able to do these tests. And that's why it may take the ramping up to get to 100% of testing may take a few days to get us there. But we will be stretching our capacity, and we will be testing 32,000 a day. This is important to protect Canadians. It's important to have a surveillance system at our borders, and this will provide us more information. And to answer your question about the holiday season, look, what we're saying today, first of all, it is not a time for panic, it is a time for concern. And what we're waiting for is we're waiting for collection of information, more data, and these measures are in place. For now, at least, we're saying for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Once we learn more about the data that we're collecting, once we know more about the variant, we will make decisions about further adjustments of our measures. So, I don't know what type of measures we will have in place during the holiday season, but I want to, take this opportunity to ask Canadians to continue their brilliant following of public health advice, to continue to get vaccinated if they're eligible to get vaccinated, to pay attention to travel measures, to travel advisory measures, because as we know to date, the pandemic is not over yet, and those public health measures here or abroad could change at any moment. So I ask Canadians to continue to be vigilant, but I'm not able to predict for you today what the measures will be around Christmas season.
I just was saying, you said 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks is essentially December 15th, so it's the week before Christmas. So we're into the holiday season. I just want to get clarity. Because of the 32,000 at least tests that you're expecting to have, you need the capacity. Should travelers expect things to be significantly slower as they're coming into Canada and crossing the border, if they choose to travel?
Undoubtedly, Evan, this is going to add, other measures at the border, and we are going to work very hard with our partners at airports and CBSA to make sure that the process is as smooth as possible. But I do want to take this moment to ask Canadians for patience and cooperation. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and there are some uncertainties out there, but we want to work diligently on protecting the health and safety of Canadians, on protecting travelers, and making sure that the processes are as efficient as possible. But I do want to ask for patience and understanding why these measures are important, and that Canadians pay attention again to these rules.
I'm just trying to be clear, because you know how frustrating travel is. You people should expect longer waits. Fair enough?
I understand how frustrating this whole thing has been. But what we're doing is really to avoid going back to lockdowns, to avoid having a negative impact on our economy, to avoid having a negative impact on the health and safety of Canadians. So these measures today are necessary to be prudent, to be safe, and to help ensure that we don't go back to lockdown days.
Let's just talk about the most important border, the U.S. border. The U.S. was exempt from a lot of these travelers crossing the border either by air or by land. It sounds to me like that's a tenuous sort of truce there. Could there be more restrictions on the Canada-U.S. border, both by air and by land? Are those conversations going on?
Let me just say that the travelers coming from the U.S. are still subject to many of our measures. They are still required to be fully vaccinated. They're still required to have a PCR pre-departure test, and they still might be subjected to a random mandatory test at the border. So those measures will remain in place, and those measures are really important. To answer your question, are we considering future or further measures to our border with the U.S.? We have to be ready for this. We have to be ready for this, and things will depend on the epidemiology situation in the United States, on more information. As we learn more information, yes, we need to be prepared for that potential reality.
Just two last questions. The first is the international responsibility. I spoke to the High Commissioner from South Africa last night. The President of South Africa and the High Commissioner were furious because they said South Africa did all the right things, identified the variant of concern, was open and transparent about it, and then got slapped with bans. Now there's 10 more countries on the Canadian list alone. And they're concerned, one, that's the wrong message, and two, it will have the consequence of countries saying, we don't want to share that we have a variant of concern. We don't want to track it because we're going to end up getting economic sanctions against us, and it's going to be brutal. So we're just not going to be transparent. It's going to have a boomerang effect. How do you justify slapping these kind of travel bans on countries where, frankly, they have low vaccination rates and the virus might be mutating, and you need their cooperation, and they're feeling very put upon right now.
Evan, first, let me just say that we all appreciate the work of the experts and scientists in South Africa. Minister Duclos gave them a shout out during the press conference in recognition of the hard work and the transparency that they put forward. It is really important for all of us to share that information. Second, I think it is incumbent on any government, and I can certainly speak on behalf of our government, that we need to take precautionary measures given the information that we're given. Let me remind you, I mean, we've done this before. In fact, within provinces, we had these measures before. So it is really important that once we have information before us, that we act intelligently, we act swiftly, but we act. And that's just what we're doing, but we're not saying that we're extremely grateful and we want to work with South Africa and other countries and other partners on helping them deal with their situation, on helping them with the pandemic, because the pandemic is never over until it's over in the entire world. So we're appreciative of South Africa. Go ahead, Evan, go ahead.
Just because of time, and I appreciate how much time you're taking, Minister, believe me. But I'm getting bombarded by questions from a lot of people who are watching you and say, holy moly, my travel plans over the holidays are toast. I got to rethink my travel. I shouldn't be going internationally. I'm concerned if I leave the country, there'll be restrictions when I come back, like the people who might be coming back from Egypt or South Africa. What is your message for people right now? They have travel plans. They've been waiting 2 years. Should they travel internationally? Should they be rebooking? Could they travel over the holidays and be facing restrictions when they try to come home?
Evan, this is an important question, and it is really important for all Canadians to pay close attention to the changing reality. We are still in a pandemic. As much as all of us would like to feel that we are moved on, but we have not. The pandemic remains a reality today in Canada and around the world. That's why we've been asking Canadians to get vaccinated. Vaccination is the best tool to confront this pandemic. We today, by the way, as November 30th, we've now imposed a mandate for travelers domestically and internationally. Anybody who's traveling on a plane or train leaving Canada or within Canada need to be fully vaccinated. So
But what's your message to travelers? Just like, what's your message? Should people now rethink their travel plans over the holidays? And could they be subject, as they're away, they think they're having a holiday, next thing they know, they're in quarantine hell?
So I want to avoid giving you a blank advice, but here's my advice, is that be prudent. Follow travel advisory measures. Be willing and ready to expect changes of circumstances. So I think it is really important to be cautious. It's really important to think a lot before traveling about your options, about your own health situation, about the country that you're visiting, and to follow advice. I don't want to just give a blanket recommendation, except just equip yourself with information and be ready for changes circumstances.
I know you got to go. Just last question. Will your government be accelerating the booster rollout program?
Minister Duclos talked about the fact that NACI now is considering this. So we look forward to receiving the advice from the National Advisory Immunization Committee on this. So until then, we're looking forward to their advice.
First of all, Minister, thank you for taking so much time. We appreciate it. There was a lot of questions, and I always appreciate it. Mr. Alghabra, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Evan.